Everyone, this is Neil Prasad with Traversing Turtle Island, and we're sitting here in St. Paul, Minnesota with, can you tell everyone your name?
Hi, I'm Tigger Lunney.
So, Tigger,
Ryan's over there. Ryan is Neil's S1W.
Mm-hmm.
So,
it's good we're all able to chill here right now.
Yeah,
and,
well, I'm glad to have you guys. So,
thank you for having us.
So yeah, what the fuck were we bullshitting about?
Mostly just like your experience, like as of, you know, Memorial Day and everything that came after, and as someone who lives here.
Well, and I'll say this, you know, for the record too. Like, I think that there's a lot of people who are very engaged, boots on the ground, like, you know, like in the Minneapolis protests, and I made a point of staying in touch with them and checking in with them and trying to check out, and I mean, you know, and my wife Allie actually did multiple like supply deliveries and stuff, and you know, because her community, the midwifery community, you know, has basic medical supplies that they could donate, things like that. But I think like what we were saying before you started rolling was, you know, being that, you know, I mean, right now we are sitting in St. Paul, and depending on how you guys came in, you drove by, you know, our neighborhood pharmacy that burned to the ground. You know, there's stuff like within a 5-minute walk of the house, where you can see what happened, and my experience of that specifically was, you know, what I was saying before is like, we in St. Paul, we didn't really truly have anything resembling an epicenter. Mm-hmm. You know, there wasn't, I think that, you know, when you hear narratives about like looters versus protesters and activists versus provocateurs and all that stuff, I mean, all those narratives are legitimate, but what you saw here was it very much felt much more chaotic, much more scattered, and you know, and when you're in a moment like that, you have to kind of operate off of the perceptions that you have. I mean, you know, I've had opportunities to rethink since then, but in that moment, I mean, you know, it very much felt like, you know, there's a bunch of people not in touch with this issue or this community, like rolling in purely for opportunism or like whatever their jollies were, whether it be like a political agenda or just, like I joked before, some, you know, redneck kids from like a suburb where they were taught to hate the Twin Cities coming in because it was just like the purge, mm-hmm. you know. And so it was interesting because, you know, I mean, we, and I speak of myself and my friends who live in the neighborhood, and just in generally the neighbors who live in the neighborhood. And this is I mean, you know, for Minneapolis, St. Paul, this is a pretty diverse neighborhood. I mean, you know, like, mm-hmm. But we definitely had a sense of people coming from the outside. Like, this felt more about or no plates at all, or I mean, Wisconsin plates. No offense, Ryan, but your home state is a hellhole and should eat shit and die.
Man, I just heard some interstate rivalry right there. God damn.
I don't even blame you. I mean, there's a reason why I'm here and not there.
Yeah, but you know, the you know, out-of-state plates, no plates at all. There was, what you experience in the moment is not necessarily the same as what you actually experience, like once you reflect on it. Mm-hmm. But like I can say in that moment, it was, I think the vibe was very much, people are coming in from elsewhere to take opportunity of that moment. And that felt really disrespectful. And like, and I'm saying specifically about St. Paul, like, I mean, totally different. Like I was down on Lake Street during the day. Like I have two kids, like, I am old and gray and not particularly interested in going to jail, and I know myself well enough to know that I would have, like,
Yeah.
like.
So you wouldn't stay out on Lake Street past dark?
No, I mean, I know, and again, it's just my personality. It's my background. It's what I've been involved in long past. That it was very much like a struggle to be like, I want to be in the middle of that, but I also have these other things that I should be doing that are my life, and also there's other things I can do, and you start to reflect on I'm an old white punk rock dude with fucking family,
Do you speak a little bit about some of the work you did assisting the black-owned businesses in the area?
I mean, in short, basically, folks on social media were kind of putting out calls of this person doesn't have any support, and to help board up their building or whatever. And so essentially, a good friend of mine who lives down the street, he and I used to work together 25 years ago when we were, dirtbags. And he and I basically, we threw a bunch of wood, just scrap plywood we had laying around in the back of his pickup truck, grabbed a couple drills, just kind of rolled around, stopped at a couple places. There were a few places that we'd actually, one place in particular where I'd seen it on social media, holy shit, it's 20 minutes till curfew, and this 90-year-old man who runs this 90-year-old Middle Eastern man down on Grand Avenue over there who runs this business and lives above it, doesn't have any way of boarding his stuff up. And by the time we got there, there were 20 people there, And so we just started rolling around, and we just kind of rolled through neighborhoods where we knew, and he'd already been down on University Avenue, which is kind of where everything went down over here.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the day after, we only truly had one day of chaos in St. Paul, and
as opposed to multiple days in
as opposed to multiple days there. And again, that goes back to, and I don't want to lose the thread of my answer for you, but that goes back to there being a specific epicenter in Minneapolis, whereas here,
that being where
the
Floyd
third
was
precinct,
murdered, or the third precinct,
yeah. Most primarily the third precinct. I mean, I think people were really respectful about treating the site of the murder as respectfully, and being kind of a place of peace. People weren't going nuts there, and if I say shit like going nuts, it's not a judgment or a pejorative. It's just what I'm saying is
kind
is
of a neutral description.
Here it was much more confusing. It was much more what's going to happen? Are they going to come to this area? Are they going to come to this area? It's a lot more spread out. I mean, you can
just geographically, the structure of St. Paul is more spread out.
Well, I would. In the sense that when you were on Lake Street, by the day after, within hours of everything going wide, there was a very clear sense of protesting and things spreading and things happening that may have been, legitimate community anger or activism, or could have been Asian provocateurs or anything, but it all kind of spread from the third precinct and sort of trolled down Lake Street. Whereas here, the closest thing, at least in my experience, and I could totally have this wrong, but what I experienced was there was there's a Target down on University Avenue where, and it's very close to the police precinct. I mean, it's literally right across the street from our police precinct, which I believe is called the Western Precinct. And because we don't like numbers here in St. Paul. It's kind of where things popped off, but it wasn't like they were necessarily protesting the precinct.
So there were no attempts to burn the precinct here or attack it in any organized way?
Not particularly. I mean, and you can, the precinct of the Target are this main street over here. You can drive straight down there, and you'll still see they still have concrete dividers blocking off the front of the police precinct. But it was never about. It was never. That's what I'm saying is it never felt in the moment like it was like targeted, or there was an organic growth. It was just kind of like, I mean, we had protests in St. Paul. Our capital's in St. Paul. People went to the Capitol. People walked from Lake Street to the Capitol. Sometimes they tried to shut them down from getting to the Capitol. But if you're talking about like what happened in this neighborhood, like that you can see, it smacked of a different kind of playbook.
What were some other aspects of the police response? Like, what were the reports of police brutality that you heard from the St. Paul PD?
Very little. I mean, things were. I think that, we certainly have had pretty terrible incidents in St. Paul. Going back, the Republican National Convention was here 12 years ago, right? 2008. And that was when I think not just St. Paul, but St. Paul, Minneapolis, the sheriff's departments, like a lot of the surrounding areas where we saw a dramatic increase in kind of like the appearance of militarization, like suddenly everybody, they weren't driving cars anymore. They were driving like SUVs that were kind of tricked out like tanks. Yeah. And I can say that with some authority because if you turn the camera around, I've got a couple SUVs tricked out like tanks in here. But there was still like that sense of wariness,
You mean the people vis-a-vis the police department, that there's wariness?
Yes. So here's an example. So a friend of mine lives down the block. I live like 2 blocks down. I live here. Between the two of us, we were kind of led like a kind of, we jokingly, this is Englewood, and we called it the Englewood Autonomous Zone. Yeah. I met neighbors. I've lived here 13 years, man. I met neighbors I've never laid eyes on before because I set up, I set up big LED shop lights, kept the street lit up because they're like, oh, well, we hear that, because at that point we were talking about like right wing, people coming in and how, tonight they're gonna like go after like actual residences to try and like make everybody look bad and that kind of thing, and so there's very much a sense of communal protection here where we've got it's Minnesota, so there's a ton of white people in my neighborhood, but we also have African Americans and Latinos so I have my friend down the street, listening to Police Scanner sitting out front, and I'm sitting out front, and a couple other folks from the neighborhood are sitting out front with me, and I would just sit there all night, and my friend would hit me up and be like, okay, this is what I heard on the Police Scanner. I'm like, okay, I'll keep my eyes out, and then but what's funny, and getting back to the point, like that wariness, like literally I would get a text from him that's like, I just saw a car roll by twice with no plates, and my response was, white guy or black guy? And you go, white guy. And I'm like, okay, cool, call the cops. Like, I mean, you know, like fuck it, fuck the white guys. Like,
Yeah.
if they're rolling around my neighborhood with like no plates on, like, call the cops. Like, that's fucking fine.
And you
like,
figure those white guys rolling around without plates were possibly these like white supremacists or these like right wingers from rural Minnesota,
or just fucking assholes.
That I saw too was cars with no plates, like in New Orleans, with no plates, and then there would be somebody with a badge inside the car. Like,
yeah.
Or like there would be there'd be some with a badge or like fully dressed, you know, in uniform, and then there would be some plain clothes with no plates, but you could tell that they had like lights set up in the dash. So that's something that I noticed.
Anything
in
sketchy,
New Orleans.
anything sketchy was like immediately like people were like taking pictures of it and putting it up on social media, and like, and I think there was like one example that I recall of like somebody being like, okay, this is clearly a cop car, like not in any way like trying to like make my perspective, like lend my perspective any kind of primacy, like, but you know, I have friends.
Speaking only for yourself, and I mean, you're the person I'm getting to speak with right now.
Yeah, but like, you know, I have friends who there's a company called Metro Sound down on University Avenue, and they do like, I mean, like any like microphones all the way up to like, you know, giant like PA setups like for festivals and stuff. You know, I mean, like they're like the spot, you know, and they got looted. Like literally, they have like cameras of dudes pulling up with box trucks, you know, and no plates, you know, like, and it's like that does that. There's like a cognitive dissonance there. There's a disconnect from like what the issues are and what the anger is about, and people being like, well, man, you know, this is a good time to grab a couple U-Hauls and roll down and steal some shit.
I did want to ask another question, just you know, now that it's been more than 2 months basically since George Floyd was martyred. You know, that was May 25th and we're in early August. What have you seen in terms of shifts in the culture and the society here? Maybe like the growth of mutual aid projects, or do neighbors know each other better now, or like what are some of the aftershocks of those events?
I think that there are a lot of positives. I think that a lot of the mutual aid stuff. I mean, there's always, and to be honest, more in Minneapolis than in St. Paul, but like here, there's always been like a very an aspect of the community that's been about you know, mutual aid and support of folks. Because like you know, I have friends who were very much involved during the protests, and then kind of as things calmed down, like redirected that energy into, you know, supporting the homeless encampments and stuff. Like, like I think that energy is there. Like I have the sense that, like, you know, like there's been a trickle over, like where like people who got activated, you know, are finding ways to stay involved. For people who had never experienced what happened, it was deeply uncomfortable, and it can be very challenging to people's notions of what life should look like. And I know from experience, because I certainly have found myself in situations where like my notions have been challenged, and it takes a lot of practice. You know, I mean, come on, like I am like straight presenting white man with like, I mean, you know, like that's the other reason why I didn't go to the protests. I didn't want to have to wear a shirt that's like, I'm one of the good guys, you know, like I mean, But seriously, like, you know, like, I get away with some shit. Like, I mean, you know, I can walk down the street pretty much fucking anywhere. I used to, I mean, you know, I used to do, like, grassroots, like, you know, political, like, I used to run political canvases and stuff, and I was, like, the guy who was, like, send me to the worst fucking neighborhood in town. All the places where all those people are scared, I'll be totally fine. Because, like, as long I'll walk up to somebody's house and they'll be like, "Are you a repo man?" And I'm like, "Nope." And then, like, I'm just here to talk about how we're going to get rid of that problem for you. And they're like, "Okay, cool." You know, like, but what I'm saying is that, I mean, my point is that, I think, and this is tied to white privilege and it's tied to other things, but it's also just an aspect of human nature. I mean, you know, and like brain chemistry, people do not respond well to having their notions challenged, and their senses of and so you put people in, even well-meaning, good-thinking people, into situations that are profoundly uncomfortable, are challenging them on some level or another, and there's going to be kind of like a very primal desire to return things back to normal. That's the thing, is that there are people who live this is fucked up every single day, every single waking minute of their lives. I am not one of those people. Like, I have, like, my own challenges that other people don't share, but, like, I understand, like, you know, you know, that I understand, like, the psychological urge to be like, oh, I just want to settle into something comfortable, you know, and so, and again, I'm being cynical. Like, I think, like, I mean, you know, like, our culture is one of fits and starts, you know, like, things are big, and once they get small again, like, people can kind of forget about them, and so, like, I worry about that.
For sure. Do you, I mean, there's been calls in Minneapolis, and I think there was a vote by the city council to abolish the Minneapolis Police Department, to build some new network of community safety and violence prevention, I think it's called. Have there been moves here in St. Paul to defund or abolish the police?
Not particularly. Not in any, not in any way that I think would be, like, attracting much attention or particularly newsworthy. But then again, I mean, like, objectively speaking, I mean, you know, also there was no sense of, you know, there was no sense of the St. Paul police being terrible police, you know. I mean, like, during, like, if bad things...
Or at least compared to the Minneapolis police.
Yeah, yes, like, what I'm saying specifically during the unrest, you know, all of the horror stories were coming from Minneapolis, you know, like, nobody was like, oh, these St. Paul cops did this and blah, blah, blah.
Do you think that's a function of Minneapolis just being a bigger city with more people? There's more poverty? Like, why is it or the culture of the MPD is just, like, qualitatively, like, more brutal than the St. Paul PD?
I would say that the perception of the culture is that the MPD is worse. I mean, I think that defunding, divesting, redirecting, reforming, like, all of these various words, you know, that people talk about when they talk about creating a new, actual community-based system of public safety, you know, I mean, that is, I don't want to come off as if I'm arguing for the point, well, you know, St. Paul cops are fine, you know, like, because that's certainly not what I'm saying. I do think that, I mean, you know, there's been a lot of awareness raised about systemic cultural issues like across the board in American policing. You know, but like I say, going back to that moment, it was definitely like, I mean, generally culturally, this is thought of as like the quiet, kind of sleepier, smaller of the two cities. You know, if shit was bad here, and I'm not ruling it out, like, it didn't get as much play. The Minneapolis Police Department Union's president is a very outsized personality, advocating
he's spoken at Trump rallies, I believe, right?
And very aggressively problematic about his approach.
I've heard he's put out a lot of like white nationalist rhetoric, essentially, right?
I mean, fundamentally, like, he is not a pleasant person. You know.
What's the name of this individual for folks watching?
Bob Kroll.
Bob Kroll.
Yeah.
How you spell that last name?
Kroll. And you know, and you know, and everything he put out in the wake of everything was, you know, like, everybody's out to get us. I mean, you know, there's the whole insularity of
really building up that
like the warrior training mentality of current policing being one where it's like
Dave Grossman's Killology. Right?
Yeah, and you know, and Kroll is a total I mean, like, a total Grossmanite. Like,
and Grossman, for those of y'all who don't know, Dave Grossman was a peacetime Green Beret stationed in West Germany who came up with a system of killology that he teaches to American police departments over the decades.
Yeah.
And I think there's a pretty strong correlation between that and the increasing brutality and militarization of American police departments, especially since the war on terror kicked off.
It's very culty, and it's very you know, I mean, the easiest way to get people to do something is to put them all in a room and say that everybody else is out to get them. And that's what Grossman does, and that's what you know, leadership like police leadership like Bob Kroll does, and that is what he put out in the wake of it. Everybody's out to get us. It is so much more than the narrative of just a few bad cops. It's a whole culture that allows those bad cops to thrive, because you don't need an entire organization of bad people. You need an entire organization where there's a few bad people and everybody else is terrified of them, you know, and then you become encultured into that, and then that becomes your culture, you know, because nobody can spend every waking minute of their day fighting against what they see in front of them with what they choose to do. It's not how we're taught in America.
Either you quit the police force or you just acquiesce to it.
Yeah, exactly. And there's been interesting essays, you know, from ex-cops talking about like that struggle, you know, like there's interesting essays from black cops talking about that struggle. You know, like there's there are but I mean, you know, this is in our society is a collection of systems, and all systems have failure points, and naturally, like, when things start to fail, it's much harder to replace or improve them than it is to ignore those failures and redirect the narratives around something else. You know, like, I mean, you know, especially when, like, when you add in the isolation, I mean, like, you only got to drive 15 minutes to get to a suburb where you're going to be surrounded by, you know, people with, like, thin blue line, Blue Lives Matters, blah, 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 flags, who, again, that's where, I mean, it's all interconnected. Like, those people have been taught to hate the Twin Cities. So, also, if you, you know, I should also point out as a postscript that the day after Trump got got inaugurated, I was like, hey, this crazy depressed feeling I've had that the world is about to collapse is actually real now. So I've been ready for all this shit to happen since 2017. I mean, I was doing it from a place of paranoia and anxiety for years.
But none of us saw the pandemic and the economic collapse. That came out of left field. And I think that's what led to Floyd's martyrdom sparking off such a huge uprising.
Oh, yeah.
That it wouldn't have had the economy been good.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Because there's been plenty of martyrs all the past couple of years. I mean, Mike Brown and Trayvon Martin, Oscar Grant, Sandra Bland, the names go on. And it didn't spark anything like this because, you know, people had jobs to go to.
Yeah, no.
And people weren't looking at 200,000 dead from this by the end of the year.
Yeah, and
estimate.
it was a lot harder to avert your eyes.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
when everyone's stuck at home.
And I still think that you know, some credence has to been like the other piece of that is that like we've seen it so many times and we've seen so many bad examples like nationally and even locally. Like you are 5 minutes from where Philando Castile was murdered.
Yeah.
You know, like
which was back in 2016 for those watching.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Like we've seen it so many times, but I think that we've all gone a little crazy right now, and the sheer egregiousness of I mean, 8 minutes
and 46 seconds.
You know, 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Like, I've got a 9-year-old son. I couldn't get him to do anything for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Like, you know,
yeah.
Like, so yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what that is.
We've actually passed the half-hour mark, and I mean, I really appreciate you taking the time to answer all these
Dude, no
questions of
problem.
mine and share your perspective as someone who's lived through the unrest, this uprising that began here in the Twin Cities. I guess for folks who have watched or who are going to be watching, do you have any like final thoughts or maybe suggestions about ways to assist the situation here?
I mean, so as a rule, I would never pretend to speak to people who were less privileged than I. I think that the thing that I would say to people who come from a place of privilege, as I very much do, is that you know, when you have that urge to just have everything go back to normal, that's a very sharp edge, because like we all have to take care of ourselves and engage in self-care. And I'm not saying that, like, you know, that I haven't plopped down and watched a mindless movie in the last 2 months. But at the same time, like, fight that instinctive urge to kind of push those feelings, that stress, that pain that, like, became very real to you for that period of time. Fight the urge to push that away, because that's what some people live through every single day. And then find ways of being helpful and continuing to be helpful, and continue to listen to people, because like I say, like, we are all enculturated into, I mean, like, it is neuroscience, man. When something makes you feel uncomfortable, you disengage it. And so don't forget that there's an obligation to fight that instinct. Yeah. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much
No
for
problem.
taking this time to speak with me. Seriously.
No problem.